Hi, this is Miss Park, and I'm making this video to give you some tips about how to make yourselves look good in cross-examination. Earlier today, I heard Miss Lynn tell one of her teams that cross-examination is kind of like the Wild West. So that is true. It's hard to know when you look more credible than the opponents, and it's hard to know what's happening really because you both are improvising. I will tell you up front that it's better to prepare more ahead of time and to speculate and to think about what could potentially happen and have a plan for that ahead of time than it is to just go in with no prep whatsoever. So the whole point of the cross-examination is to provide some time for your teams to improvise answers and to make your team and position look more credible. Do you sound like you know your stuff? Are you at ease with answering questions about your debate topic? Another thing that you might want to do is if you need to put in any additional evidence that didn't fit into your team's arguments and your speakers 1, 2, and 3 speeches, you might want to throw in some evidence in a question that you're asking your opponents or in a response that you're giving to your opponents when they ask you a question. So I'm going to give you some tips. These aren't necessarily like preparation tips, but on the day of debates, how do you make yourself sound like you know what you're talking about? I'm going to start there. So the first is to speak clearly and calmly and confidently. Don't be squirrely and don't ask questions or make statements that don't make sense. That ruins your credibility. Also, you should be trying to speak as much as possible, and you should be trying to take up as much of those 10 minutes as possible. When you're asking questions, you should be asking good questions. When you're answering questions, you should be answering every question and trying to take up as much time as possible. The rules are that each team has 5 minutes to ask their opponents questions. The opponents have 15 seconds to begin to respond. If they do not begin to respond in those 15 seconds, then the moderator will ask the team in control, the ones who are asking questions, to ask a new question. And that looks really bad for the team that wasn't able to start an answer in 15 seconds. The other thing that the team in control, the ones who are asking questions, can do is if the people who are answering questions, their opponents, are going on forever, the team in control can say, "Thank you for your response. We'd like to move on to a new question," and cut off their response. There is a good way to do it. It's what I just said. "Thank you for your response. We'd like to move on to a new question." Not, okay, that's enough, because that makes you sound like you are being defensive and you do not want that. The thing is that you have to give them adequate time to respond, but it feels like they're going on and on. You can take that time back. So when you are the team in control, when you are asking your opponents questions, the following are the tips that you would want to follow. So 1, your questions should be specific and well-worded. Don't ask confusing questions. If the judges are confused and the audience is confused, then they'll be on the side of your opponents. If your question is clear and your opponents cannot answer it, then it's clear who is at fault there. Also, when you're the team in control, you should try to take up all 5 minutes. If you don't, and you're saying, "We have no more questions," that looks like you haven't prepared for this debate, and in fact, you probably haven't prepared for this portion of your debate. The other thing that you should do is what you should do is ask questions to try to get them to admit something that supports your side. You should also try to get them to concede to one of your points. If it sounds like they don't know much about one part of your topic and you know a lot about them, ask more follow-up questions. If they can't answer those questions or they answer in kind of an ignorant way, then you can be satisfied that your judges are aware of that and you can move on to a new line of questioning. There's this dance that you have to do, or this balance that you have to do between asking a lot of different questions on a lot of different subjects and also following through and making sure it's clear that your opponents don't know something about a particular topic. If your opponents start to answer something that you didn't ask them, and they start to filibuster a little bit, you can stop them and say something like, "You're not actually answering the question we asked. Our question was," and then ask the question again. You can also, I'll go over this later, ask questions that include new evidence. That's something that you can do, especially if you need that for your rebuttal or closing speaker. The whole point of asking them questions is trying to get them to admit to not having enough information or to make them feel uncomfortable with their position or maybe contradict things that they've said earlier. When you are the team who's answering questions, The main point is you should take up as much time as you can and try to say a lot. At the same time, you should actually answer the question that they are asking, because if you're not, it's clear that you're using these defensive measures and you might not actually have an answer, and it makes you look bad. You have 15 seconds to begin to answer their questions, so take that time to look at your teammates, and there should be a variety of people speaking during the cross-ex. That includes asking questions and answering questions. It should not be the same person answering every single time, and it should not be the same person asking questions every single time. Please answer every question. Do not let them stump you. You can ask the team in control to repeat a question. That is the only question you can ask them. Everything else needs to be a statement, but you shouldn't really have to unless the question is really unclear. If everybody else can understand what the question was asking and you say, can you repeat the question? It either means you weren't listening, which is bad, or you are filling for time or searching for time, and that also makes you look bad. When you're asking questions and if they're answering questions and if their question doesn't really make sense, call them on it. Say, well, your question is unclear, but I think you're asking us about this thing. So, and then give evidence for that thing. Also, when you're answering questions and you're unable to ask them questions, you might be able to make statements that shows your assumptions. You can say things like, this questions make us think that you don't realize this fact, or your team is not thinking about X, Y, or Z, but to answer your question and then answer their question. You can answer in a way that shows that you are critical of their questioning strategy. Your criticism should be in your evidence and in your thought process and in your clarity, but not necessarily in your tone. This is not the time to insult your opponents or to get super sassy and to get super attitude-y towards the moderator or towards the opposing team, because your judges will take out a decorum penalty if that's the case. These are the things that make you look not as credible. I just mentioned the attitude and sass. The other piece is being stumped or not able to clearly answer a question that has been clearly stated. Your ability to look like you know what you're talking about is important. Please fake it till you make it. Seem confident and make it appear that you know what you're doing. The other thing is that you will be able to prepare specific evidence on your tabletop to look at. You should not waste time flipping for a piece of evidence. If you remember the gist of what it said, then you should start answering from what you know, and hopefully another team member can help you find it as you're beginning to answer. Do not make things up. This is one of the reasons that we have you give your citations to the judges. They will know, your opponents will know. Please say clear sentences. If we can't understand you, it's a problem. You need to be taking advantages of opportunities to ask follow-up questions. If your opponents seem like they don't know something and you move on, it might reflect badly on you. And then again, asking the people to repeat a question over and over and over again makes it start to seem like you aren't listening or you're nervous. Some tips to help you to avoid all of these things. Please take notes when your opponents are delivering speeches 1, 2, and 3. And as they're delivering their speeches, you might want to draft questions based on the things that they've said. If you have a list of pre-prepared questions, and you should, you might want to star or circle the questions that you really want to ask them. That way, in the minute before cross-examination, you can go through these drafted questions and you can go through the questions that you've starred and put an order to them. The other thing that you need to do ahead of time is you should organize your information into a system that works for your team. It should be clear, it should be readable. You shouldn't have a million pieces of paper that you need to look through, but there might be a list of evidence that you think would be helpful to you. The next thing is not that helpful on the day of the debate if you haven't prepped ahead of time, but know your information, be prepared, be able to talk about statistics and where those statistics come from and facts and studies. Know your evidence backwards and forwards if you don't have to look for something and you know something off the top of your head. Great. Have enough prepared questions so that way you can take up the 5 minutes where you're the team in control. those are all ways that you can prep for this debate. I am happy to help you. I'm sure your English teachers and your IHS teachers are happy to help you to speculate on what you might have to answer and what questions you might want to ask your opponents. Below are some sentence stems. You might want to ask a series of follow-up questions. You might want to say something like, given the fact that the study from Harvard University says X, question. You might want to ask a leading question like, don't you feel like a victim's family deserves justice? And then they will have to respond to that question that supports your side. You might question their idealism, especially if you are the negative side. You might say, how can you be sure that this thing will actually happen? You can point out logical fallacies in their subclaims when you're asking questions. And then you should probably point out exactly which speakers are saying what. This last large fonted thing is asking you to be overly cautious before the debate, over-prepare for the cross-examination and the rebuttal. That over-preparation will allow you to be confident during the debate. The more you prepare ahead of time, the more you should feel at ease and the more you should feel like you can do this. Please remember that cross-examination is a team sport. All of your team members should be part of the strategy for cross-examination, and your team needs to decide what that strategy actually is. Good luck.